So today we're going to be doing a small class on cleaning a striker-fired handgun. Now the first lesson is to always treat the weapon with respect. You have 4 universal weapon safety rules. I have a 5th one. Those safety rules are: 1, treat every weapon as if it is loaded, even if you know it's not. 2 is never point the weapon at anything you're not willing to destroy. 3 is to keep your finger straight up and off the trigger until you're aimed and ready to fire. 4, know your target, consider the foreground and background. And then 5, always know the condition of your weapon. And if those don't all make sense, you can go to another lesson where we talk about the weapon safety rules in much detail. So first thing we always want to do when we come up on a gun, we want to make sure that it is in fact unloaded. So utilizing those weapon safety rules, I lock my slide to the rear and I inspect. Hey, there's no magazine inserted and there's no round in the chamber. Great. Now on this style of a weapon, this is a Sig Sauer P365 XL. With the slide lock to the rear, I'm gonna take the back end of this takedown lever and just simply boop, push it down like that. Then I'm gonna gain positive control of the slide, the top portion upper receiver. I'm gonna send that slide stop home, and I'm just gonna simply slide it off, take it apart. And then we're gonna have the lower receiver. We're gonna push in on this guy here and then lift up. That's your buffer spring and buffer tube. And then we're just gonna go ahead and jiggle that little guy. And then it's gonna go, so it's gonna go forward, flip it, and then we're gonna pull back on it to get it out. And that's it, 4 main components for a striker-fired handgun. And again, if any of this doesn't make any sense, just go ahead and see the curriculum that we're putting out. There's nomenclature, different styles of weapons and different weapons conditions, how to lock the slide to the rear, all that stuff. So, all right, what are we going to do? Well, some of the tools we're gonna need are a large brush, some wooden Q-tips. I have a screwdriver here, call it a scrub brush. I have a scraping tool for carbon when it gets hard. I have what's called a bore snake, a lens cleaning brush, extra scrub brush, and it's like a hard nylon brush. And then I have several rags here. So if you have any major debris, you just want to wipe all that big stuff off. On this gun, I don't. It's not that dirty. But then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go ahead. You also need your cleaning lube. I use Rem oil. So now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go ahead and give it a nice spray. And now there's a residual that gets left behind carbon whenever we shoot the gun. That's that black stuff on my hand. The goal of the oil is to lubricate all the surface areas, because that carbon will bind to the oil, and then when you use your scrub brush, it easily starts to come off. It like loosens it up. So you want to make sure you're getting all these rails, all these moving components, little pieces, the nooks and crannies. On your slide or upper receiver, same thing. Any of those railings, points of friction. Now you see I have a red dot on my gun here, this optic. I don't want to go spraying this oil up in there. In fact, I kind of want to try to avoid getting oil on it as much as possible. But we're going to talk about how to clean that here momentarily if you do have a red dot. And then we're just scrubbing. And then as we're scrubbing and as that oil is binding to the carbon, we're then going to take a rag and just dry it off. So your goal is to then wipe off any and all oil after you've given it a good thorough scrubbing, and then you're just gonna rinse and repeat over and over again. And then as you get down into the more fine-tuned areas, you use a Q-tip. You wanna make sure you have wood Q-tips though. You don't wanna use like the ones people put in their ear, which they're not even made to go in your ear. Fun fact. But you're getting this in there. You're absorbing any of that remaining carbon. You see it's a little, my gun's pretty clean. I just cleaned it not that long ago. So you want to make sure that you're getting those friction points. Next, you could take what's called a bore snake, unravel it, spray some gun oil down the barrel here, and you see all those grooves in there. It's called grooves and lands, or rifling, and that's what causes the bullet to spin like a football, rather than like the muskets of the Revolutionary War, where it was like a soccer ball essentially traveling through the air. So you're just going to go ahead and run that through. I run mine through in the direction of travel, so I don't just like go jamming this up in the opposite direction of what the bullet travels. I put it in to go through like the bullet travels. And that doesn't necessarily mean much on a handgun, but when you get to like longer guns, that could be a really big deal, especially when you get out to like distances like 1,000+ yards. So for the spring, I'm going to spray the spring, and I'm also going to give this a scrub. Any untreated carbon can also cause the components to get dried out, and so we just want to avoid that. We just want the gun to be nice and clean and smooth and sexy, just like a good, well-oiled machine, and then it'll operate like a good, smooth, sexy, well-oiled machine. Again, friction points in these railings. And then when it comes to this lower receiver, a little trick that I learned is I'll take my brush, the small end, I'll put the rag on it, and then I'll just start kind of jamming it in, absorbing some of those harder to reach areas, but they're too big for like a single Q-tip, but yet they're too small to really get your finger in there with the rag. And then of course to fine tune these little grooves. Now, if you have carbon that gets like really hard, because if we don't clean the guns regularly, carbon can actually like solidify and become very difficult to remove. So that's why I have this scraping tool, or even like a flathead screwdriver. You want to be careful with this, because when you get into these smaller parts and you start scraping like hard, you could damage some things. But ultimately you do want to be able to get all that carbon off, and you could tell when the carbon is on there because it's like a matte. So when you spray, it's like all glossy, and you'll be able to see all that carbon and grime starting to gather together and bind to that oil. It just looks like crud. And then you'll see these like really matte black areas where it's not shiny. That's like hard carbon, so you got to get in there and you have to scrape that stuff off. All right, so once we've cleaned both the inside and the outside of the gun, we also want to wipe down the outside. Oil has anti-corrosion properties, so it keeps the gun from getting rusty. Just give it a wipe down. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to reassemble the gun just in the opposite way for what we put it together. So give it a nice little 1-2 spray lube on those railings, a little 1, a little 2 on the lower receiver components. And with your slide flipped upside down, you're going to take your barrel, give that a little, and you're spraying a little spray. Everything should have a nice little lube layer to it. Put it in as such, kick it back in place, and it like locks in place a little bit. Take your spring and put it in that hole like this one, and make sure you have the right end going forward. If you have it backwards, the gun will not work properly. And then you're gonna push this backside down onto this little like half moon ledge right here. You have this first step, then you have like this little half moon ledge in there. So that's where you're going to want this spring to rest. Just like that. Then you're going to take your lower receiver, and you're going to take these rails right here, those grooves, and you're going to line them up with those rails right here in the back. So as such, rails, and grooves. And then for this style gun, at least, you're just going to go ahead, push it all the way back, and lock that slide to the rear. Then that takedown lever automatically locked in place, so if yours doesn't, push yours up. And we're going to need to perform what's called a functions check. So a functions check is to ensure that we put the gun back together properly and all the components and all the characteristics are working well. In this case, lock the slide to the rear. So let's just go ahead and send it home. Lock the slide to the rear. Cool, nothing weird happened. Send it home again. Now, if you have a safety, you want the safety on, you'll point it in a safe direction. Attempt to engage, the gun should not go off. If you don't have a safety, then you're just gonna follow through what I say here. Pull the trigger, keep holding the trigger back. You're going to cycle the slide as if it was actually shooting, and then slowly release the trigger. Now we hear that trigger reset. So this gun is good to go. I'm gonna give it one more wipe down here on the outside for the oil. Again, just making sure that it's looking smooth, looking sexy. And then we're gonna move into the optic. So for the optic, you really wanna use some sort of alcohol, like a lens cleaner. Don't ever touch it with your fingers. The oil on your fingers degrades the anti-scratch capability or the anti-scratch film on the lens. So what I'll do is I will pull out this lens brush and I will kind of put it in here and just twirl it around. And then I'll also kind of put it down a little bit so it's a little bit more firm for like this front piece or these shallower parts. But then when I got to go like deep, like all the way in there, like quarter, half an inch, I'll just flex it all the way out and then spin it around as such. Look through it. Looks good. And that, ladies and gents, is how we do basic gun cleaning. So let me know if you have any questions.